It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
We have the great Pulitzer Prize winning columnist, Michael Goodwin. Michael, you just wrote a really powerful column saying that Tim Walz completes the progressives' takeover. Explain.
Well, look, I think that the Democratic Party, of course, has always been flirting with the left and moving, certainly in the era of Barack Obama, moving further and further left. And now you have these two candidates for the ticket, both of whom are leftists. I mean, if you go back even 4 years ago, Joe Biden was portrayed as a moderate. He turned out to be a lot less moderate than advertised. But nonetheless, there was at least this idea that there was a moderate, and then you would have a vice president, Kamala Harris, who checked a lot of DEI boxes and was from San Francisco's politics. So there you had, the more traditional approach to a ticket, which is you try to broaden the outreach to different constituencies in the hope of stitching together a majority. But now what you have is a strictly left ticket, no moderation. I mean, quite extraordinary when you look at things that Kamala Harris has said over the years and things she has supported. And then when you see what Walz has supported and done in Minnesota and said about other things, there's nothing like it in the history of the United States.
Yeah, it's stunning. By the way, I'm looking at some statistics as we were talking about burn, baby, burn. Minneapolis violent crime is up 30% since Tim Walz took over, so that's nothing to be bragging about.
And Caracas is almost down to zero.
Yeah, that's right. Because you know why, John? They brought them all here.
Yes.
Right? I mean, how is that? You want what happened to Minneapolis in 2020 to happen to America, Michael Goodwin?
Well, I mean, that's what they're offering, aren't they? Don't forget, I mean, I thought one of the great confluences here was that his reluctance to call out the National Guard during the 2020 riots, saying that his sympathies lied with, the marauders. And meanwhile, Kamala Harris is encouraging people to donate to a fund to get them out of jail. So you have the two of them. I don't think they were working together at that point, but they were in it together in the sense that they were into this mindset that rioters and marauders and looters and arsonists, they deserve an understanding. I mean, it was an extraordinary time.
Where did we hear that before, Michael?
Well, that's right. I mean, that's the Alvin Bragg argument. That's the argument of all of these leftist prosecutors and politicians who say, that the criminals are misunderstood, and somehow the victims don't really matter, but it's the criminals we have to focus on, do away with the prison system, do away with any kind of restriction. They just need a hug, apparently.
And Michael, I'm old enough to have grown up in New York City when the psyche of the average person was such that when you were the victim of a crime, it was your fault. When the woman said, I wasn't holding my purse tight enough, or I forgot to take my necklace off on the subway before it got snatched.
Right. And
that's what
this
leads to.
What's interesting about what has been happening in Minnesota is that it is following the pattern of New York in the sense that people are leaving. Higher income families fearing for their safety and fearing for the rapacious nature of the inheritance tax, the personal income taxes, the lack of the police department falling in terms of numbers in the major cities. People are fleeing just as they are fleeing New York and California.
And Michael Goodwin, Judge Weinberg.
Michael, do you know there were hundreds of billions of dollars in losses in Minnesota during that? And you also know during the COVID epidemic, there was more grafting going on, supervised at his program, money just disappearing and misused. So what kind of record does this man have to be the vice president of the United States?
Well, I think it's a very fat record for the Republicans. I think there are a lot of, as the military would say, a target-rich environment. But but so does Kamala Harris. And I think that's what remains to be done here, is for the Republicans to sort of have a huddle and figure out what they're going to do. I mean, I can understand they were thrown off guard by the switch from Biden to Harris, but it's been a couple of weeks now, and it's time to get back to business. And I was watching J.D. Vance a bit earlier today. He was going after Walz on this issue that you didn't go to Iraq. You want this plaudit for being in the National Guard, but when it came time for them to be deployed to the war zone, you resigned. There are members of that unit publicly calling Walz a coward, that he abandoned the mission because it wasn't convenient for him. So I think there's a lot to be uncovered on both of them. A candidate consultant in Pennsylvania told the New York Times the other day that we will run out of time before we run out of videotape of Kamala Harris saying dumb things.
By the way,
we just haven't seen those yet. So I think the Trump team needs to get on the stick here. Time is wasting.
I was watching J.D. Vance earlier. I thought it's the best J.D. Vance I have seen, since this moment where he got chosen as the running mate, because he's feeling emboldened. I mean, it's such a stark contrast. The other thing, this astounded me, Michael Goodwin. You brought up the service issue of Tim Walz and what others in his unit have said. He also said, and I was just checking this to make sure, because this is an astounding statement. He also said when they finally were trying to push to get the National Guard in, to come in and help, to block and stop the burning of Minneapolis back in the summer of love of 2020. And you ready for this? I don't know if you heard this, Michael. This is amazing. The mayor was like, yeah, we got to get the Minnesota National Guard and let's get them all in. We need to save our city. This is a liberal mayor begging for help. And so instead, Tim Walz, member of the military, said, what do you think you're going to get with these people? Do you think you're going to get well-trained, great troops, or you're probably going to get 19-year-old cooks? That's how he described the National Guard. He took a swipe at the Minnesota National Guard. I mean, right. In other words, you're not even going to get great troops. I mean, this is a member of the military? That's shameful.
Look, I think that he is vastly overrated, and it's all there. But I think what the Democrats are trying to do is brilliant, which is essentially spring this surprise of Harris and Walz on the nation, and then sprint to the finish line. Fewer than 100 days. I mean, the honeymoon will probably continue right up. Certainly with the media, continue right up until the convention, which is a couple of weeks, and then go from there. So they're really trying to shorten the game. I mean, this is a team that doesn't have a lot of confidence in itself, really, but it's trying to get away with something. Well, and so they want to hurry it up. They won't do interviews. They won't do anything like that. It's just going to fly straight ahead. Don't take questions. Don't get involved. Just attack, and try to get across the finish line before anybody notices.
Well, Michael, what I find very, I don't want to use the word depressing, but...
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rudy. Yeah.
I mean, this team, this candidate, is probably the most defined presidential candidate we've ever had. Where you have all of this tape, and I'm looking at our media, and I'm saying to myself, don't you people see what you're doing to the country? I just don't get it. I mean, the Chinese have stood up an army in our country. We know that we have Middle Eastern terrorists. My fear is that when this war starts in the Middle East, it's going to start on the streets of New York at the same time. I mean, when I look at this, what we're set up for, and, these people being viable, I'm saying to myself, they shouldn't even be viable. The silence in America is scary. that nobody is saying, you did this to us. Our economy, our security, everything.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is shocking that what they have gotten away with already, and how they turn everything into some kind of racial or gender issue. That you're a racist, you hate the poor, you're white supremacist, you're a Nazi, and we're going to lock you up. I mean, that approach is, they're not kidding. I mean, this is both their domestic policy and it's their foreign policy that are, I think, on the table here. And you look at what's happening around the world. Is it just a coincidence that all of this happened under Joe Biden's watch? I mean, you have to be a fool to believe that.
Right, and they're saying Trump's the chaos candidate. You go, what?
They have seen in Joe Biden a weak American leader, a fractured nation, and so the adversaries have seized the opportunity, and they will not quit as long as he's in the White House. And imagine if Kamala Harris succeeds him. So there's an urgency here. And don't forget, Joe Biden is still president. But have you heard from him? Have you seen him? Apparently he's just spending more and more time in Delaware.
Yeah, and by the way, of course, Pelosi says he should be on Mount Rushmore. Remember that? Biden should be there. That is the classic. Yeah, consequential. Michael, thank you. Great to have you here. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.